We're in New York with Rosemarie Bravo, a director on the boards of Estee Lauder, Tiffany, and Williams-Sonoma, and of course, the former CEO of Burberry. How can the board help the CEO be successful? And how can the board help in the development of high potential management?
Well, a board could be immensely valuable if a CEO and management team know how to use the board. Board members are there to add value. And the boards that I have been on and have observed, there's a great deal of expertise around the table on all various subjects. So you have a variety of expertise. And it's up to the CEO and the chairman to be sort of the band leader and to figure out how to utilize the best of the talents that they have around that table.
Okay. Well, give me a couple of examples. I know that in some of the boards that you sit, there have been programs and panels put in place.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about those.
Most recently, I've been involved with Williams-Sonoma's leadership team, where they asked 2 or 3 of the board members to meet to talk about our successes and, yes, our failures. What are some of the things we learned as we were running companies, and what are some of the things we want to pass on to new leaders and what we thought was important in a leader? We have a wonderful program at Estee Lauder called Sempre Novus, and it means always new, because Leonard Lauder, our chairman emeritus, believes that one executive must always be learning. Everything has to always be new because the business we're in is forever changing and is transformational. So his mantra is, how do we keep the executive team always learning and the nuances of all the various aspects of the business that one is involved in? So he has a program that's run by Phoebe Port, whereby they bring executives from all around the world and they invite board members to attend just because they believe so much in leadership. So I think it's a very, very wonderful program.
Now that makes it obvious that the time commitment required from a board member is much different today than it was maybe a few years ago.
Yeah.
Talk a bit about how much time is required and why it's changing in corporate America.
I've seen the board meetings themselves really evolve and be stretched, in most cases, now almost 2 full days when you get done with the committees and the executive sessions. Some of it is due to the good governance practices that we have to deal with. And so time is needed to follow some of the regulations to make sure that we're doing all the things we're supposed to be doing. And then you have the actual business of the business. And because in a couple of these cases, I'm mentioning Estee Lauder and Williams-Sonoma, you have multi-brands. So even getting a board to be familiar with all the different brands in terms of presentations, that takes up a lot more time. A company like Tiffany that is burgeoning in Asia and places around the world, you have all of a sudden international, where maybe 10 years ago didn't even exist. Almost every board meeting, you have a session on China. The importance of China as a market, the importance of the Chinese consumer, the importance of the Chinese consumer who travels into duty-free outlets, the importance of Chinese consumers in Europe, shopping in Paris, shopping in London, shopping in Berlin. So this has changed the whole complexity of learnings, again, for the board to keep them up to speed, and also to ask the board to add value on some of the experiences that they might have with some of these markets that are international. Technology has changed everything for us. Right. So now you have e-commerce, now you have Pinterest, now you have Twitter meetings, Facebook meetings, and you're talking now about social media as another major topic, which if you go back even 5 years, didn't exist. Right. So I think it's more complex, it takes more time, and I find that the materials you get in advance, you all of a sudden, maybe years ago you had books like this, now you have books that would be like this, but of course they're all on the iPad. Right. But you have material that has to be read. You have to take time then. If you have a question about the material, you have the time to inquire about that. Then you have the board meeting itself. Then you have the post meeting, because the meeting itself raises questions and issues that you might want to think about, you might want to mull over, sleep over, and think, well, maybe this was a good idea, maybe it wasn't, but what did they mean by this? And I want to call so-and-so to ask about this.
Rosemarie, why is it important for a sitting CEO to be on an outside board?
When I first became CEO of Burberry, I was asked to sit on the Tiffany board at the time. And I thought to myself, oh, I'm not going to want to do this. And my board isn't going to let me do this because I'm just going to be too busy just having taken this new role. And my very foresighted chairman said to me, you absolutely should do this. This is a wonderful opportunity. You will learn immensely and it will add value to what you're doing at Burberry. And he was so right. That was in 1997. And it helped me immensely because I was able to almost have a front seat at watching a company go international, watch a company develop an e-commerce site from a catalog business, watch how they developed their licensee arrangements with various categories of product, arrangements with franchise partners in places like the Middle East and Russia that were difficult to do business on your own at that time. So it gave me a window into a world as a new CEO that I felt like I was learning, and probably they were giving me more value than I was giving them at that time. But it was a wonderful learning experience.
Well, talk about what it takes then to be a good director, a good board member.
Well, you have to be interested in the business and in the company, obviously, that you're involved with. And I think in short order, you figure out where can you add value. You try to say, well, how is my experience relevant to that particular business? And given who else is there, where can I add value? And I think being on a board sometimes means knowing when to zip, and also knowing when you can contribute and you may be the authority on that particular subject versus maybe other subjects where you have a point of view, but you may not be as informed as somebody else. I mentioned Estee Lauder and their incredible leadership program, and Fabrizio Freda's mantra is, he calls it leading from every chair. And he's come up with this little cheat sheet, I guess you would call it.
Right.
And he talks about things like thinking strategically, engaging the team in the vision, embracing change, developing talent, energizing others, building collaborative relationships, demonstrating agility, driving creativity and innovation, striving for excellence, and having high-touch leadership competencies. And I thought, what a great little Bible for a board member.
Right.
Because all of these areas are areas that we as board members are supposed to care about. Talent, strategy, vision, of course the plan and approving the plan, and of course following good governance. But beyond all of that, these are things that are really additive, I think, to a company management team if a board member is really engaged in some of these very important points.
You mentioned Estee Lauder.
Yes.
And Estee Lauder has a person who is the CEO, president and CEO,
Yes.
and another person who's the non-executive chairman.
Yes.
That's becoming more of a trend,
Yes.
splitting those roles. What is important about splitting or not splitting those roles?
Well, that was a very new concept to me when I became the CEO of Burberry, because in the UK, it's mandatory to have a chairman and a CEO. So they split the roles. And so all public companies have the split role. And so it was unheard of in my experience. And I found it to be excellent for me. It worked for me very well. I had two different chairmen during my 9-year tenure at Burberry, both of whom were very different, who had very different skills, and both of whom were extremely additive to the value equation at the company. Mm-hmm. And I think it's like any other good CEO, how to utilize the resources that are available to you. And I always looked at, even though I was reporting to the chairman, I always looked at the chairman was working for me. Mm-hmm. How can I use this chairman, this person with so much expertise in fields and areas that I really maybe not as knowledgeable as he was. In both cases, they were male. And I found that I developed this concept of delegating upward, because there were areas that I felt, gosh, I don't have time to do some of this other work. It could be working with the city at the time. It could be reviewing investor relations conversations. And I had my second chairman there was an expert, John Peace, in dealing with the city, because he had been a CEO of a FTSE 100 company. Mm-hmm. So he knew the ins and outs of the city. And I figured out that my value added was more in the product and the merchandising and the marketing. And if I could spend my time doing that, and he helped me in an additive way, running the board, doing so many other roles that he was able to do for me, that I was going to be more effective. I think one of the things you hit upon early, Roger, is how complex it is today to be a CEO. I mean, there isn't a day that goes by that there is not another article in the newspaper about another CEO either wanting to get out, being thrown out, staying too long, adding different roles. I mean, there's every day, it's like the big topic. And you ask yourself why it's become so much more complex than it was, say, 5, 10, 15 years ago. So having this dual role, I think, is meaningful, and especially if the personalities conjive. You mentioned Estee Lauder. You have William Lauder as chairman. You have Fabrizio Freda as CEO. Their assets, their strengths very much compensate for one another. They're able to go on to different subjects. I'm now watching at Williams-Sonoma Adrienne Bellamy, who's the chairman, and Laura Alber, who is a new CEO, relatively new CEO. I think she's in the second year. And the learnings for her, having a chairman who's been a CEO of a global company and was a chairman of Gucci Group, before that. And so this is a lot of experience and expertise that's brought to the table. And I think a wise CEO can just take advantage of all that knowledge.
Well, the environment, for retail especially, has changed so dramatically over the years. How has that affected the competencies needed for CEOs to manage well?
I think CEOs in retail really have to take their Wheaties because you're 24/7 now. The retail landscape is so competitive. And when I think back when I was beginning my career in retail at Macy's, and the complexity of what you deal with now, from Amazon.com to Target to Saks Fifth Avenue to designers' own boutiques, you're getting competition from every part of the world. And I think added complexity to the business and to the landscape. Of course, the whole e-commerce conversation, and those companies like Williams-Sonoma, Tiffany, that had catalog businesses, I think it was easier for them to go into e-commerce than maybe somebody like Burberry at the time that didn't have a catalog business. So we didn't even have mail order. We didn't even have warehousing for mail order and for catalog. So people like Estee Lauder that had some catalog business, you were able to then transform that into e-commerce. And certainly Sonoma was a great example of how they went very easily into e-commerce, and now e-commerce represents, and direct-to-consumer represents a big part of their total business. So I think it added to the complexity of what a role of a CEO is in today's world.
Does that necessarily mean, though, that a CEO must bring to the table experience in digital media, in social media, in technology, or can they have just fundamental good management skills?
Yeah. I think you need fundamental good management skills first, of course, and you need good leadership skills that we talked about earlier. I think that you're going to want expertise for sure in e-commerce and social, and where you get that on your board, whether it's in the head of marketing or you actually bring someone on the board, as Williams-Sonoma has just done, bringing the head of marketing from Google onto their board, for example, to get that technology know-how. So there's different ways around it. I think to think that one CEO, one human being, is going to be able to possess everything that's necessary to be a great retail CEO, I think is a fallacy today, because I think you have to, it's about building the team, I think, more than ever, and having a strong CFO, COO, in the case of the dual leadership roles, the chairman, and splitting the role CEO. I've come from the merchant line. I come from the product line. So I think for a retail CEO not to have been immersed in merchandising, product, stores, I think that's hard. I'm not saying impossible, but I think today you want somebody that knows your product, because after all, nothing happens in retail until a customer buys something. And so you need to have some understanding of the product and what it's about, and how to drive that dream that you're selling.
Well, you mentioned the board.
Yes.
Is there a new profile for a good board, a good director?
I think a lot of the nominating committees that I sit on really spend a lot of time developing the areas of expertise that one must have on the board. And so if I bring up Estee Lauder, one of the things they felt passionately about, the head of the nominating committee, who's Lady Linda Rothschild, she felt we needed to have Asian representation. Mm-hmm. And she went very far to find Wei Christensen, who came onto the board as coming from China, living in Shanghai, believe it or not, and able to make the commitment of the board meetings. And so it's been invaluable. So it depends on the board. I mentioned Sonoma, and they absolutely wanted to have somebody come on from e-commerce. They felt they needed social media and understanding more than e-commerce. They wanted to really understand technology, so they have the Google person. I think boards are probably, nominating committees are spending a lot of time scrutinizing the backgrounds of what they have, who may be getting close to retirement, who's going to be going off the board, and then what are the talents that we want to, bring into the company. And I think on the top of everyone's list, of course, is international experience. Mm-hmm. People are craving that, not just on boards, but even for executive talent. And having the ability to live elsewhere, having lived in another part of the country, having lived in another part of the world, this is a big asset. And I would say to young people who are out in the process of building their career, that if they get an opportunity to move, to relocate, to live in another part of the world, even another part of the country, I would grab it. I would grab it, because I think having that is a very important asset to have in your bag of tricks.
Estee Lauder has done a tremendous job in terms of having a number of women on its board, but other companies haven't done as good a job. How do we get more women in leadership roles in corporate America?
I'm so glad you mentioned Estee Lauder. And of course, the company was founded by a woman and had women in probably almost half their brands, actually running billions of dollars worth of businesses individually, as mini CEOs, if you would call it that. And I think they were always a company that really sort of understood it. And, from Leonard on down, I think you've had this feeling of supporting women. So when it came to the board, and when Leonard was taking the company public and creating a board, he made sure this whole idea of balance on the board and diversity, just in every way. Today we have more women actually on the board than we do men. It employs women, and I think more than 70% of the staff around the world is women. And women in countries, running countries, women in legal counsel, women HR, women communications. I think that the whole world is going this way, and understanding that the connection between the products that they're selling and who the end consumer is, and what the management of the company is, and what the board reflects, there should be some kind of connection here. And I do think that this next generation, we're going to see a giant leap forward in terms of many, many women, especially in our country, getting to that CEO corner office. It means making some sacrifices, and this is male or female, or anybody, just a person has to realize that stepping into that next level, it means they have to make sacrifices.